The station smelled of burnt metal and old rain, though there was no rain within 100 light-years of it. Daniel Whitlock had never gotten used to that smell. It came from the cooling vents of the old cargo bay, a smell that reminded him of thunderstorms back home, and he liked to stand near it during his breaks, breathing it in like a man remembering something he had lost. He was not important. He would have said so himself without any bitterness. He fixed loading arms and checked pressure seals on cargo containers, and most days nobody on the station knew his name. The council delegates who walked past him in the long silver halls did not look at him twice. To them, he was just another human in a gray jumpsuit, one of the newest and strangest species to join their circle of worlds. The station was called Ashgate Reach, a neutral meeting point built between 4 star systems, where different species came to argue, trade, and occasionally almost start wars. Today was supposed to be simple: a vote. The Velorans, a tall insectal people with silver eyes, wanted permission to clear out a species of large predators from a colony world they were settling. They called the creatures Threshounds, and they had brought one along, sedated and caged, to prove to the council exactly how dangerous the species was. Daniel had seen the creature being unloaded that morning. He was the one who checked the containment pod's pressure seals before it went into the cargo elevator, a routine task he had done 100 times before. But this cargo was different. Through the small viewing window in the pod, he had seen an eye open just for a moment. It was a deep amber color, ringed with faint blue light, like a lantern behind smoked glass. It looked at him, and then it closed again. He had felt something in his chest that day, something he could not name. Not fear, something closer to recognition. The Threshound was, in most ways, like nothing found on Earth, and yet it reminded him powerfully of something very familiar. It stood as tall as a large horse at the shoulder, its body long and lean like a wolf's, but built with 6 limbs instead of 4. The extra pair folded close to its ribs when it walked, used mostly for climbing steep terrain. Its fur was a deep silver gray, and along its spine ran a faint line of blue bioluminescence that pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat made visible. Its ears were tall and constantly moving, and long whisker-like sensory hairs framed its face, twitching at sounds too quiet for human hearing. Its teeth, when Daniel had glimpsed them through the glass, were long and curved, built for tearing through the tough hide of whatever it hunted on its home world. The Veloran scientists called it a monster, a pest, a thing to be removed so their colonists could farm the land in peace. They had brought it here not to study it, but to make an example of it, to show the council exactly what kind of danger their people faced, and to win support for wiping out its entire species from the planet. Daniel had read the files, out of simple curiosity, the night before. The reports described violent attacks on Veloran outposts, livestock torn apart, guards found dead at the edges of camps. But something about the reports bothered him. Every single attack had happened near a den site, or near what the scientists called nesting grounds. Every attack happened after Veloran drilling equipment had been active nearby for weeks. No report mentioned an attack happening anywhere else. He was not a scientist. He had no official reason to question the data. But he had grown up on a small property at the edge of nowhere, where his family had kept animals and dealt with wild ones too, coyotes that came down from the hills during hard winters, dogs found half-starved on the roadside, snapping and afraid. He knew what fear looked like when it wore the mask of aggression. He had learned to read it as a boy, long before he had learned to read a star chart. He tried briefly to raise his concerns with his supervisor that morning. He was told, not unkindly, that it was not his place. The council would decide. The vote would happen after the demonstration. His job was pressure seals, nothing more. So he had gone back to his post, and he had told himself it was not his problem. By midday, the central chamber of Ashgate Reach was full. Delegates from a dozen worlds sat in tiered seating that curved around an open floor, built wide enough to allow large exhibits to be brought in for viewing. Guards in dark armor stood along the walls, their weapons holstered but ready. In the center of the room, on a raised platform, The containment pod sat waiting, its systems humming quietly. Daniel was not supposed to be in the chamber. He had been sent to run a final diagnostic on the cargo elevator lift just outside, a small unglamorous task that put him only a few dozen feet from the doors. He could hear the murmur of alien voices through the thick glass, the rise and fall of formal speeches he did not understand, delivered in translated tones that always sounded a little too smooth, a little too careful. He finished his check and should have left. Instead, he lingered near the observation window, watching the pod on its platform and the strange, still shape curled inside it. He did not know why he stayed. He only knew that something about that pulsing blue light along the creature's spine made his chest feel tight, in a way he did not have words for yet. He would understand it very soon, because somewhere in the wiring of that old containment pod, a single strained bolt was about to fail, and the peaceful order of the chamber was about to come apart in an instant. A sharp crack echoed through the chamber, and for half a second nobody understood what it meant. Then the containment pod's front panel folded outward, torn loose by pressure that had built up for weeks inside a system nobody had bothered to inspect closely, and the threshound came out of it like water bursting through a broken dam. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates screamed in a dozen languages, translators struggling to keep pace, and chairs clattered as bodies scrambled backward over each other. The guards along the walls raised their weapons in one sharp motion, the air suddenly thick with the whine of powering energy cells. The threshound did not charge. It landed hard on the chamber floor, stumbled, and let out a sound that was not quite a roar and not quite a scream, a sound with pain woven all through it. Its 6 legs splayed unevenly beneath it, and one side of its body dragged low, as if it could not fully bear its own weight. The blue light along its spine flared bright, then dimmed unevenly, flickering like a candle in wind. Daniel had reached the observation window in time to see all of it happen, and something in him went very still and very focused. The way it always had whenever the world around him suddenly turned loud and dangerous. Inside the chamber, the beast pressed itself backward against the curved wall beneath the delegate seating, putting solid stone at its back. Its head swung side to side, tracking every guard, every raised weapon, every voice shouting orders in languages it did not know. Its lips pulled back over its long teeth. A deep, rolling growl rose from its chest, low enough that Daniel could feel it faintly through the floor even from outside the glass. To the Veloran scientists watching from the upper tier, the message was clear and simple. This was exactly what they had been trying to warn the Council about. A predator, cornered, showing every sign of readying itself for a killing lunge. One of them, a narrow-faced Veloran named Director Kess, stood and shouted for the guards to fire before it could reach the seating. The Council's senior officiant, a broad-shouldered being with plated gray skin whom the humans on the station simply called Chairwarden Ost, raised a hand for calm, though his voice shook slightly as he gave the order. Hold position. Contain if possible. Terminate if it moves toward the seats. Daniel watched through the glass, his hand pressed flat against it without realizing he had moved. He was looking at the same scene everyone else in that chamber was looking at, and yet he was seeing something different. He saw the beast's ears. One stood tall and swiveling constantly, tracking sound with sharp precision. The other lay flat and unmoving against its skull, and every few seconds the beast's head twitched hard toward that side, as if trying to shake something loose that would not come free. He saw how the growl rose in pitch every time that twitch happened, climbing from a deep warning rumble into something thinner, sharper, almost a whine forced through gritted teeth. He saw how its weight rested unevenly, favoring 3 legs over the other 3, the way an injured dog favors a sore paw without meaning to. He saw how its eyes, wide and ringed in amber, did not fix on any one target long enough to commit to an attack. They darted from guard to guard, weapon to weapon, searching for a way out that did not exist. This was not an animal preparing to kill. This was an animal that believed it was about to die and had nowhere left to run. He had seen that same look years ago, kneeling in the mud at the edge of his family's property, in front of a half-wild dog with a broken leg and torn ear, snapping at anyone who came near because every hand it had ever known had hurt it. His father had told him to step back. He had not listened then either. Daniel pushed the chamber door open before he had fully decided to do it. The nearest guard turned toward him, startled, and barked at him to get back. This was not a place for station crew. Daniel ignored him. His eyes were fixed on the beast, and his voice, when it came out, was steady in a way that surprised even him. He said, loud enough to be heard but calm enough not to startle anything further, that the creature was injured, not hunting, that its posture was defensive, that someone needed to check the pod's internal sensors before anyone decided to put it down, because the data would show exactly what he was seeing with his own eyes. Director Kess turned on him immediately, demanding to know who this crewman thought he was, interrupting a council safety matter. Chairwarden Ost held up a hand again, this time toward Daniel, his expression unreadable behind layered gray plating. "There is no time for a debate," the chairwarden said. "The creature is a danger to this chamber. Step back, human, and let the guards do their work." Daniel felt every eye in the room shift toward him, alien and human alike. Dozens of unfamiliar faces suddenly locked onto one gray jumpsuited cargo technician who had no business being anywhere near this conversation. He felt the old, familiar urge to shrink back, to apologize, to let people more important than himself handle it. Instead, he looked past all of them, to the threshound pressed against the wall, its flickering blue light and twitching ruined ear, its wide, frightened eyes finding his for one brief moment across the chamber floor. He took a slow breath, and he stepped forward instead of back. Nobody stopped him at first, because nobody quite believed what they were seeing. A single unarmed human, walking calmly across an open chamber floor toward a wounded, cornered predator, while a dozen armed guards stood frozen with their weapons half raised, unsure whether shooting near him was more dangerous than letting him continue. Chairwarden Ost found his voice half a second too late. "Stop," he called out. "That is a direct order, get back behind the line." But Daniel did not stop, and something in the way he moved, unhurried, almost gentle, made even the guards hesitate to grab him. Among the small cluster of human staff watching from the side doorway, there was no shock at all. A woman named Ruth, who ran the station's environmental systems, simply crossed her arms and murmured that she had wondered when someone was finally going to do that. An older man beside her, one of the station's dock supervisors, nodded slowly, as if watching something obvious finally happen. To them, this was not remarkable. It was simply what people did, back on a world full of dangerous, half-wild things that still somehow ended up sleeping by the fire. Daniel kept his eyes low, not staring directly into the threshound's face, because direct eye contact from a stranger reads as challenge to almost anything with teeth and instinct, whether it evolved under an Earth sun or some distant alien star. He let his shoulders drop and his hands hang loose and open at his sides, palms turned slightly outward. He slowed his breathing on purpose, long and even, the way his father had taught him years ago, because animals in pain can feel panic in another creature the way they feel heat from a fire, and panic only ever made things worse. He crouched slightly as he walked, lowering himself, making his shape smaller and less like a threat looming over the beast. It was a simple thing, something a farm kid learns without ever being taught it in words, just by watching, failing, and trying again with 100 frightened animals over the years. A memory rose in him without invitation as he crossed the open floor, sharp and clear despite the years between then and now. He was perhaps 11 years old again, kneeling in cold mud at the edge of a fence line, in front of a stray dog that had wandered onto their land half-starved, one leg bent wrong, snarling at every hand that reached for it because every hand it had known before had thrown stones or worse. His father had told him to leave it, that it was too far gone to help, that some things could not be reached. Daniel had stayed anyway, sitting in the mud for almost 2 hours, saying nothing, simply being still, until the dog's growl slowly wore itself down into exhausted silence, and it let him close the last few feet. That dog had lived another 11 years on their land, and had never once bitten anyone in all that time. He carried that memory with him now, 40 feet, then 20, then 10, closing the distance between himself and a creature large enough to end his life in a single motion, in front of a council chamber full of alien delegates who had no framework at all for what he was doing. The Threshound's growl deepened as he approached, its lips curling further back, the injured ear twitching hard again. Its head lowered, and one massive paw scraped once against the chamber floor, a warning gesture that needed no translation in any language. Daniel stopped just outside striking range and lowered himself the rest of the way to one knee, making himself as small and unthreatening as he could. He did not reach out yet. He simply stayed there, letting the beast look at him, letting it decide, for a long stretch of seconds that felt far longer to everyone watching than they actually were. Somewhere above, Director Kess was shouting something about reckless human behavior proving exactly how unfit their species was for council standing, but the words barely reached Daniel at all. His entire world had narrowed down to 6 feet of space and one pair of wide, frightened amber eyes. He began to speak quietly, not in any particular language, not really forming sentences at all. Just tone. Low, even, unhurried sound, the same wordless rhythm he might have used calming a spooked horse or a frightened child. It was not what he said. It never was. It was how steady his voice stayed while he said it. The Threshound's ears flicked toward the sound, one smoothly, the other in that same broken, uneven twitch. Its growl faltered, rose again briefly, then faltered once more, uncertain. Daniel shifted his weight forward, slow as dripping honey, and extended one open hand, not toward the creature's face, but low and to the side, an offering rather than a reach. The back of his hand presented first the way you offer scent to a strange dog before ever attempting to touch it. The beast's head snapped forward, jaws opening wide, and for one terrible heartbeat every person in that chamber, human and alien alike, believed they were about to watch a man die in front of the entire Galactic Council. The bite never landed. The powerful jaws stopped less than an inch from his fingers, teeth clicking shut on empty air with a sound like a door slamming, a controlled and deliberate warning rather than a true strike. Daniel did not flinch, did not pull his hand back, did not so much as blink. He simply said very softly that he wasn't going to hurt it either and stayed exactly where he was. Silence, real silence, is a rare thing in a chamber built to hold arguments from a dozen different worlds. But for the length of 3 long breaths, that is exactly what fell over the room. Even the guards, weapons still half raised, seemed unwilling to break it. The Threshound's jaws remained open, its breath hot and heavy against Daniel's fingers, close enough that he could feel it. He did not move his hand away. Instead, very slowly, he turned it, palm up, and let it rest in the small space between them, unguarded, exposed, a gesture that meant something different across every world but somehow always meant the same thing underneath. I am not going to hurt you. I am not afraid of you either. The beast's jaws closed, but not on his hand. It simply shut its mouth and pulled its head back a few inches, watching him with an intensity that felt less like a predator sizing up prey and more like confusion, like a question with no shape yet. Daniel kept his voice low and even, the same wordless tone he had used the whole way across the floor. He shifted his weight another few inches closer, still crouched, still small, still slow. His eyes moved briefly, professionally, over the visible parts of the creature's body, the same way he might inspect a damaged cargo seal, searching for the source of a problem rather than staring at the danger of it. He found what he was looking for near the base of the ruined ear. A thin, dark line ran down through the fur just below it, half hidden by matted blood, and embedded in the skin near the ear canal was a small, curved piece of shattered glass, likely broken free from the containment pod's viewing window during the failure. It was not large. It did not need to be. Pressed against skin that sensitive, against nerves that fine, it would have been agony with every movement of the head, every sound the beast tried to track, every single time it turned to look for a threat. That explained everything. The uneven growl, the twitching ear, the wild eyes that could not settle on one target because the pain itself never settled either. This was not a monster deciding who to kill first. This was a creature in constant, sharp pain, surrounded by shouting voices and pointed weapons, doing the only thing it knew how to do when it hurt and could not escape. Daniel let out a slow breath, and something in his shoulders relaxed, not because the danger had passed, but because he finally understood what he was looking at. He raised his hand again, slower this time, and reached not toward the injury itself, but toward the good ear, the undamaged one on the opposite side of its skull. He had learned this trick decades ago with frightened dogs and skittish horses alike. Approach the pain from the side that does not hurt. Build trust there first. His fingers found the base of the healthy ear and began to scratch, gently, in slow circular motions, the exact gesture any dog owner back on Earth would recognize without a moment's thought, a grooming touch, warm and familiar, the kind of contact that says something ancient and universal about safety. The threshound went rigid for a heartbeat, muscles locking beneath its silver-gray fur. Then, slowly, impossibly, the growl in its chest began to change. It did not vanish all at once. It thinned, the low, threatening rumble unwinding into something higher, uncertain, almost questioning. And then, as Daniel's fingers kept their slow, steady rhythm, it dropped into something else entirely, a low, rolling sound from deep in its chest, warm and rhythmic, closer to a cat's purr than anything else humans had a word for. Daniel's other hand moved with careful precision toward the embedded shard, using two fingers the way he might work a stubborn bolt free from a stripped socket, patient, exact, unhurried despite everything happening around him. The beast flinched once, a full-body shudder, but did not pull away, did not snap, did not do anything except let out a single sharp whine as the glass came free and clattered onto the chamber floor, followed by a thin trickle of dark blood that Daniel immediately pressed his sleeve against. The pulsing blue light along its spine, which had been flickering unevenly since the pod first broke open, steadied at last into a slow, calm rhythm, glowing softly rather than flashing in distress. In the tiered seating above, nobody spoke. Chairwarden Oss stood frozen, one hand still half raised from the order he had never finished giving. Director Kess had gone entirely silent, staring down at the scene with an expression no translator could have properly rendered. The guards along the wall, without any order at all, lowered their weapons, first one, then another, until every barrel in the room pointed toward the floor. The threshound leaned its head, very slightly, into Daniel's hand, the way a massive dog might lean its full weight against a trusted person's leg, seeking more of the same slow, steady touch. Daniel obliged, scratching gently behind the ear he had just healed, his voice still murmuring the same low, wordless comfort it had offered the entire time. For that moment, there was no council chamber, no armed guards, no watching delegates from a dozen worlds. There was only a frightened, injured creature finally allowed to stop fighting, and one quiet human who had simply refused to see it as a monster in the first place. High above, unseen by anyone in the chaos, a single council recording drone captured every second of it, and the footage would be replayed across a dozen worlds before the week was through. Word travels strangely on a station built from a dozen languages, faster than any single voice could carry it, and by the time the chamber doors finally opened again, most of Ashgate Reach already knew something extraordinary had happened inside. Crew members lined the corridors outside, alien and human alike, trying to catch a glimpse of the cargo technician who had walked unarmed toward a cornered predator and lived to scratch behind its ear. Daniel did not feel like he had done anything extraordinary. He sat afterward in a small side room off the main chamber, his sleeve still stained dark from pressing it against the wound, while a council medical officer checked him over out of procedure rather than real concern. He answered questions quietly, without embellishment, the way he answered most things. He had seen the ear. He had seen the twitch. It had reminded him of something he already knew. Chairwarden Ost came to find him personally, which was, according to the murmuring aides trailing behind him, not something the old officiant had done in the many years he had served the council. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking, his gray-plated face unreadable as always, though something in his posture had softened since the chamber. He asked Daniel directly why he had not been afraid. Every scan, every model, every trained expert in that room had read the Threshound as an imminent threat. Only Daniel had seen it differently. He wanted to know what training, what technology, what advantage Daniel's species held that theirs did not. Daniel considered the question honestly before answering, because it deserved an honest answer rather than a quick one. He said that he did not think humans held any special advantage at all. He said that pain looks the same on any world, once you stop being afraid of the shape it is wearing. He said that the beast was never actually dangerous in the way the room believed. It was hurting and cornered, and every living thing behaves the same way when both of those things happen at once. The only difference, he said, was that he had simply been willing to get close enough to see the difference between anger and pain, rather than assuming they were the same thing from a safe distance. Chairwarden Ost said nothing for a long while after that. Then he asked, quietly, whether this was common among Daniel's people, this willingness to approach dangerous, wild things rather than destroy them out of fear. Daniel almost laughed at that, though he kept it polite. He said that humans had spent thousands of years doing exactly that, not out of bravery, but out of stubbornness and curiosity in equal measure. Wolves that became dogs sleeping by the fire. Wild horses that became companions carrying children to school. Even animals that killed people sometimes, humans still tried to understand rather than simply eliminate, more often than not. It was not a universal virtue, he admitted. Plenty of humans were cruel to animals too, but enough of them, across enough of history, had chosen patience instead of fear that it had become something close to a habit stitched into the species itself. Word of the conversation spread through the council delegations even faster than the footage from the recording drone had. By evening, the chamber reconvened, not for the vote that had originally been scheduled, but for something else entirely. Director Kess argued bitterly that nothing had truly changed, that one calm creature proved nothing about an entire species capable of tearing apart livestock and guards alike. But her position had lost most of its ground the moment every delegate in that room had watched, with their own eyes, a supposedly savage predator lean its head into a stranger's palm like an oversized dog greeting a friend after a long absence. A junior Veloran scientist, visibly uncomfortable interrupting a superior, finally raised a point that had apparently been quietly troubling several of the researchers for some time. Every recorded Threshound attack, without exception, had occurred near active drilling sites or disturbed den grounds. Not one had ever been recorded happening anywhere else. It was a detail that had always been present in the data, simply overlooked in favor of a simpler story about a dangerous species that needed to be removed. Chairwarden Ost, standing at the center of the chamber floor where the Threshound had crouched hours earlier, called for a formal suspension of the cull order pending genuine field study, conducted by researchers willing to observe the creatures in their own territory, rather than simply cataloging the aftermath of conflict from a safe distance. The motion passed with far less resistance than anyone expected. As the chamber slowly emptied, Chairwarden Ost lingered near Daniel one last time. He said, with something almost like humor beneath the formal weight of his voice, that the Council had spent decades studying humanity from behind glass and data screens, the same way Kess's scientists had studied the Threshold. Perhaps, he said, it was time they tried getting a little closer instead. Daniel simply nodded, tired in the particular way that comes after fear finally lets go of a body, and said that closer was usually where the truth actually lived. Behind them, in a newly repaired containment habitat with proper space to move rather than a cramped transport pod, the Threshold lay curled in a corner, its blue light pulsing slow and steady, calm at last, its ruined ear already beginning to heal. 3 weeks is not a long time, not by the standards of a station that had stood in its quiet orbit for over a century, but it was long enough for a great many small things to change at Ashgate Reach, and long enough for one very large thing to heal. The Threshold no longer lived behind reinforced glass in a cramped containment pod built for transport rather than comfort. After the vote, a proper habitat had been built into an unused section of the station's lower ring, wide and tall, fitted with real stone and climbing ledges shipped in at no small expense, along with soil and plants pulled from environmental samples of its actual home world, rather than whatever scraps had been convenient before. The Council, embarrassed in the particular way that powerful institutions become embarrassed when caught being careless, had spared little expense once the matter became a very public one. Daniel visited most evenings after his shift ended, not because anyone had asked him to, and not because there was anything official about it. He simply went, the same quiet habit he might have had visiting a barn full of animals back home, except this barn happened to sit inside a space station and held a creature that could have ended his life with a single bite 3 weeks earlier. The Threshold always heard him coming before he reached the habitat door, that same sharp hearing that had once made its pain so unbearable now simply useful, picking his footsteps out from every other sound in the corridor. By the time he stepped through, its head would already be raised, ears forward, the healed one and the one that still bore a thin pale scar where the glass had been removed, both listening for him. It would cross the habitat floor in a few long, easy strides and press its head against his hand before he had even fully raised it, the same gesture it had learned that first terrible day, seeking the same slow scratch behind its ear that had first taught it a stranger's touch did not always mean pain. Daniel obliged every time, settling onto the low stone ledge just inside the enclosure, one hand working gently through thick silver-gray fur, while the creature's low, rolling purr filled the quiet space around them. He had started calling it Wren, mostly by accident, after catching himself murmuring the name one evening without quite meaning to, some half-buried memory of a small brown bird that used to nest outside his childhood window. The name had simply stuck, and now half the station used it too, though the Veloran researchers still preferred their formal designation in their reports. Word of what had happened in the chamber had not stayed confined to Ashgate Reach for long. The recording drone's footage made its way through council channels and beyond, replayed and discussed across a dozen worlds within days. Some delegations found it deeply unsettling, a reminder of how easily fear could shape a decision meant to be rational. Others found it strangely moving, evidence of something worth studying about the newest species to join their circle. A new delegate arrived on the station near the end of that third week, a slim, pale-scaled being from a distant system who had heard the story secondhand and clearly did not fully believe it. She stood now at the edge of the habitat's viewing rail, watching with open skepticism as Daniel sat inside with the massive predator's head resting heavily against his knee, its purring rumble audible even through the reinforced glass. She asked one of the station aides standing nearby whether this was some kind of trained performance, staged for visiting delegations to reassure them. The aide, a young man who had been on shift the day of the breach, only shook his head and said that nobody had trained anything, that the creature had simply been hurting and frightened, and one human had been willing to get close enough to notice. The delegate watched a while longer in silence. Inside the enclosure, Daniel said something too quiet to hear through the glass, and Wren's tail, long and thickly furred, swept once across the stone floor in what could only be described as contentment. The delegate finally turned away from the rail, her earlier skepticism replaced with something quieter and harder to name. She had come to Ashgate Reach expecting to study a new and unpredictable species, one whose intentions the wider galaxy still did not fully trust. She left the viewing platform instead thinking about something much simpler, the particular strangeness of a species that had spent its own history tamming wolves into companions and wild horses into friends, and had now, without any special weapon or technology at all, done something similar to a creature an entire council had been ready to destroy out of fear. Later that evening, as the corridor lights dimmed toward the station's simulated night cycle, Chairwarden Oss stood once more at the same viewing rail, alone this time, watching the same quiet scene through the glass. Daniel sat with his back against the stone, half asleep, one hand still resting in Wren's thick fur, the creature's steady blue light pulsing slow and calm beside him like a lantern that had finally stopped flickering. The chairwarden did not call out, did not summon guards or aides or any of the formal ceremony that usually surrounded him. He simply watched, the way the whole council had watched once before, though this time there was no fear in it at all.